I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
Prince William entered Catherine's private suite, expecting a quiet conversation. Instead, he stopped dead. Standing inside was Queen Camilla's personal secretary, alone, surrounded by a space William considered deeply private and protected. He did not shout. He did not demand an explanation. His face tightened. His eyes moved from the secretary to the open interior door, and then he made one devastating decision. William turned around and walked out. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William knew that room was different from the formal spaces where royal business usually unfolded. Catherine's private suite held family schedules, personal correspondence, confidential conversations, and sensitive household decisions away from ceremonial life. The Prince and Princess of Wales, titles used for the heir to the throne and his wife, depended on that separation because privacy inside a royal household was protection. Camilla's secretary belonged to the Queen Consort's administrative circle, making that unexplained presence feel less like a mistake and more like a deeply personal boundary nobody should have crossed. Catherine heard what had happened minutes later, and her reaction unsettled William more than anger would have. She did not raise her voice. She became still and asked one question. Who gave permission? No one answered. The silence hardened something inside the future king. He had resisted confronting the secretary because one furious sentence could ignite a family crisis. But the lack of an answer made restraint feel dangerously close to surrender. William returned to the corridor and learned something worse. A senior aide, speaking through a documented internal account prepared after the incident, confirmed that the secretary had remained inside long enough for staff to notice, yet nobody challenged the presence immediately. That mattered because the suite was not an ordinary passageway. Access carried meaning, and the silence suggested that someone, somewhere, had expected the secretary to be there. The next detail cut deeper. William learned that the secretary had entered through an internal corridor instead of the usual route for scheduled meetings. He gripped the door handle, looked back once, then slowly let go. Walking away prevented an explosion, but it did not answer the question now hanging over Catherine's private space. Catherine stopped him before he could demand answers elsewhere. She told him there was something he needed to hear first. Days earlier, the same secretary had approached her privately and asked a question that had seemed strange at the time. Now it felt deliberate. William thought he had just witnessed the beginning of the problem. Catherine was about to tell him it had actually begun days earlier. The confrontation inside Catherine's suite mattered because this was never merely about a secretary standing in the wrong room. Behind that single moment were three competing loyalties: William's instinct to protect his family, Catherine's determination to preserve her independence, and Camilla's expectation that her household should move freely within royal machinery. What appeared to outsiders as palace administration had suddenly become something painfully personal and potentially impossible to contain. William could not separate the incident from Catherine herself. To him, that suite was more than a royal workspace. Belonged to their marriage, their children, their private decisions, and the fragile line separating public duty from family life. The royal household, the staff and offices supporting each senior royal, depended on clear boundaries because one careless intrusion could expose far more than schedules. Catherine understood that risk immediately, and the prince understood why her silence felt heavier than anger. Catherine sat opposite him and placed her untouched tea down. She admitted that what disturbed her most was not the possibility that something had been removed. It was the assumption behind the entry. Nobody from another household should have needed to be told that her private rooms required permission. William wanted names, explanations, and immediate accountability, but she urged him not to move too quickly. If he accused Camilla without evidence, A personal violation could become a permanent conflict between two royal households. Camilla faced her own shock at almost the same moment. Her secretary was not simply an assistant, but a trusted gatekeeper who carried messages, coordinated requests, and often decided what reached the Queen Consort's attention. When a brief message arrived saying William had seen the secretary inside Catherine's rooms, she read it twice. She lowered the phone and remained silent. Whatever explanation existed, she understood that the incident had already moved beyond routine palace administration. Catherine then gave William the details she had withheld. Through a private, recorded conversation between them after the incident, she explained that 3 days earlier, the same secretary had approached her following an engagement and asked unusually specific questions about changes to her personal schedule. At the time, she had dismissed it as awkward coordination. Now the question felt different. William's expression tightened before she had even finished repeating it. Catherine hesitated, then went further. The secretary had mentioned a confidential household restructuring she had discussed only with William and one trusted aide. That information had never been circulated formally. The future king stopped asking why someone had entered the suite. A darker question had replaced it. If the secretary knew about a conversation that should never have left Catherine's household, then the real mystery was no longer why they entered the suite, but how much they already knew. Every palace rupture has a moment that seems insignificant, until everything after it changes its meaning. For William and Catherine, that moment came during a private reception several days earlier. Catherine had stepped away from the main gathering when Camilla's secretary approached her beside a closed drawing room door. The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody raised their voice. Yet one carefully chosen question would later become the detail William could not explain away. Catherine had entered that reception determined to keep family matters separate from official business. Different royal households were present, meaning separate teams of staff were working around the same event, but private schedules and internal decisions were still expected to remain protected. She had also begun reorganizing parts of her own household, drawing a firmer line between ceremonial duties, family time, and sensitive correspondence. A household restructuring simply meant changing how staff responsibilities and communications were organized. It was private because those changes affected who could see what, who could contact whom, and how much access other offices would have. Camilla's secretary approached quietly and asked whether Catherine's proposed restructuring meant certain communications would now bypass the Queen's office completely. The question landed with force, because the proposal had never been publicly circulated. Catherine did not challenge the secretary there. She refused to turn a family reception into a confrontation. But she later admitted in a private recorded conversation with William that the exchange had left her feeling watched rather than consulted. William reacted immediately when he heard that. He wanted to know why Catherine had kept it from him for 3 days. She answered that she had no proof of wrongdoing, and feared that raising suspicion too early would deepen tension between him and Camilla's circle. The prince understood the logic, but it did not calm him. If someone outside their immediate team knew about the restructuring, then one of the safest assumptions inside their household had already failed. William checked who had been present when the proposal was first discussed. The list was painfully short: himself, Catherine, and one senior aide. Then Catherine remembered something worse. During the reception, the secretary had used an exact phrase William had spoken during that private conversation, language she insisted she had never repeated elsewhere. William slowly pushed his chair back. He crossed the room and asked, "Who else heard us?" Catherine did not hesitate. No one should have. That answer ended the debate. No. William decided the matter could no longer remain between aides. He requested a direct meeting with Camilla. Catherine immediately said she would be there too. By the following morning, William was no longer searching for an administrative explanation. He was preparing to ask Camilla directly whether her household had crossed a line. The meeting began politely. That lasted less than a minute. William sat opposite Camilla, with Catherine beside him, and asked a question so direct that every carefully prepared palace phrase became useless. Why had her secretary been inside Catherine's private suite? Camilla's answer did not calm him. Instead, the Queen's attempt to frame the incident as routine household coordination pushed William toward the confrontation everyone in that room had hoped to avoid. William had insisted on a private meeting for one reason: nobody would be able to hide behind a wall of aides. Catherine wanted the same thing. Royal households, the separate staff teams supporting individual senior royals, often coordinate schedules, messages, and official duties, but that did not give them automatic access to private rooms. Camilla explained that staff sometimes moved quickly between offices when arrangements changed, and described the episode as an unfortunate misunderstanding. The prince's expression hardened at the word. William rejected that explanation immediately. Catherine's suite was not an administrative shortcut, he said, and private access could not be assumed simply because two households worked under the same royal system. Then he asked the question that changed the room. Had Camilla personally authorized the visit? She answered no. The Queen Consort insisted she had never instructed anyone to search, inspect, or gather information from Catherine's rooms. William listened, but he was not finished. Catherine remained composed, until Camilla suggested that her secretary may have believed informal permission had already been granted. "Not by me," she said quietly. The words ended the argument for several seconds. Catherine did not need to raise her voice because the meaning was clear. Whatever understanding the secretary believed existed, it had not come from the person whose privacy had actually been crossed. William then introduced the detail Camilla was not prepared for. Through a documented account of his private conversation with Catherine, he repeated the exact phrase the secretary had used about the confidential household restructuring. Camilla stopped defending the visit. She asked him to repeat the words. He did. Catherine watched as the Queen Consort's confidence shifted into concern. William stood and placed both hands on the back of his chair. Until he received a credible explanation, he said, Camilla's secretary would not enter Catherine's private working rooms again. The Queen did not challenge him. Camilla answered with something far more disturbing. Her secretary should never have known about the restructuring proposal either. For the first time, William and Camilla were no longer arguing over access. They were staring at the same possibility. That information had been moving through the palace without either household fully controlling it. The confrontation exposed an uncomfortable truth. Royal power is not exercised only through crowns, titles, or public announcements. Sometimes it lives in calendars, keys, corridors, staff permissions, and the quiet authority to decide who sees what. William had drawn a boundary around Catherine. Camilla had denied ordering it crossed. That meant someone beneath them had either misunderstood authority or deliberately used the ambiguity between two royal households to move where they should not have moved. William could not ignore how easily confusion could become power. Separate royal households often work side by side during ceremonies, travel, scheduling, and family events, and those overlapping responsibilities can make one staff member appear to carry more authority than they actually possess. A palace chain of command simply means the route through which permission is given and responsibility is traced. Catherine's private suite did not belong to that shared system. Her own household controlled access, and that distinction now mattered more than ever. Camilla felt the weight of the same problem from the opposite side. If she had never authorized the visit, then someone had used the strength of her office without her direct approval. That was humiliating. Her secretary was trusted precisely because the role required judgment, discretion, and restraint. Now the Queen Consort had to consider whether loyalty to a longtime staff member was blinding her to a serious failure. William faced an equally uncomfortable possibility. His anger at Camilla may have been aimed too high, or not high enough. A documented access record reviewed after the confrontation showed that the secretary entered the corridor under an appointment designation that did not match the explanation later given to him. The future king read the line again. The visit had been logged one way and defended another. Charles received the summary privately and immediately focused on Catherine. He removed his glasses, set them down, and asked whether she believed her privacy had been intentionally breached. When William answered that she did, the king's mood changed. He read the corridor entry twice, circled the mismatched notation with a pen, then pushed the page across the table. The authorization had come from a shared administrative desk, rather than directly from either senior household. Charles understood what that meant. Someone may have relied on a loophole, using ordinary administrative access to enter a space that required direct permission. The monarch ordered an immediate clarification of access rules and demanded a full account of who approved the entry. But the palace review never got the chance to move quietly. Before the new rules could even be written, Camilla's secretary requested a private meeting and offered to give a documented account of exactly why they had entered Catherine's suite. The palace was preparing to determine who had opened the door. But the person at the center of the storm was about to speak first. By afternoon, Camilla's secretary understood that silence was becoming more dangerous than explanation. William had imposed a boundary. Catherine wanted answers. Camilla herself now questioned what had happened, so the secretary requested a private interview with senior household officials and gave an account that altered the entire emotional balance of the crisis. The explanation did not erase the breach, but it revealed that the original reason for entering Catherine's suite had been concealed. The secretary explained during that private interview that the original task had been to locate a scheduling file connected to an upcoming joint engagement. A joint engagement simply means an official appearance involving more than one senior royal, often requiring several households to coordinate times, staff, and security. The secretary believed another staff member had already cleared access, yet that excuse created a new problem. The file could have been requested through normal channels. There had been no need to enter Catherine's private rooms personally. Camilla felt the betrayal immediately. Her secretary had relied on the authority of her household without confirming whether Catherine's team had actually agreed to the visit. The queen consort asked, face to face, why her name had been allowed to become a shield for unauthorized access. The secretary hesitated. That silence hurt more than any polished explanation could have. Camilla had defended the possibility of a misunderstanding. Now she was confronting poor judgment inside her own circle. Catherine focused on something else. She did not want punishment to become a distraction from the deeper question. How had the secretary known about the confidential restructuring before entering the suite? The answer came through the same documented interview. The secretary admitted hearing fragments of the discussion indirectly from another courtier, who had spoken with one of Catherine's aides after the original private meeting. William received the account alone. He read every page without interruption, then folded the document closed. The darkest possibility had weakened. There was no account showing Camilla had ordered a search or instructed anyone to gather information from Catherine's rooms. But the relief was bitter. Private information had apparently moved through casual staff conversation until someone outside the Wales household knew details they were never meant to hear. Catherine understood that distinction before William said a word. One secretary could be disciplined, but that would not repair a culture where sensitive information traveled through assumptions, fragments, and informal conversations. She told him privately that punishing one person would solve the smallest part of the problem. William had walked out because he believed Catherine's boundary had been deliberately crossed. Now Catherine was asking him to decide what protecting that boundary should actually look like. That evening, William and Catherine met, without secretaries, advisors, household officials, or anyone capable of turning emotion into palace procedure. For the first time since the incident, there was no Camilla, no staff structure, and no argument over authority. There was only a husband who had walked away in anger and a wife whose privacy had been breached. Catherine did not ask William to fight harder. She asked him to understand what she actually wanted protected. Catherine told him she had never doubted why he reacted so strongly. She knew the sight of someone from another household inside her private rooms had triggered something immediate in him. But she also feared that turning the incident into a personal war with Camilla would give the breach even more power. Direct communication between senior households simply meant that important decisions would pass clearly from one royal office to another, rather than being distorted through informal staff assumptions. To her, that mattered because confusion had already caused enough damage. William admitted something he had not said before. Walking out had not been weakness, it had been control. He feared that if he stayed in that room, anger would speak before judgment did. The prince knew one reckless accusation could have turned a staff failure into a permanent family rupture. Catherine listened, then told him what had hurt her most. It was not the secretary's physical presence. It was learning that private conversations had become casual currency inside palace circles. Catherine then offered the solution she wanted. Access permissions would be clearly separated. Sensitive information would be handled through tighter channels. Informal assumptions would no longer be treated as permission. She did not want revenge. She wanted certainty. William agreed, but one condition remained. Camilla herself had to acknowledge that Catherine's private space could never again be entered simply because someone believed royal authority would cover the decision. Catherine reached across the table and took William's hand. "Protecting me does not always mean fighting someone," she told him. The words changed the direction of the entire crisis. He held her hand for several seconds and promised that he would not turn her privacy into another battlefield. The future king finally understood that strength, in this moment, meant creating a boundary strong enough to survive without anger holding it in place. William requested one final conversation with Camilla. This time, there would be no accusation and no attempt to win. He wanted the matter settled permanently before palace whispers escaped into public view. The anger that began the crisis had finally become clarity, but outside those private rooms, whispers were already escaping the palace. By the next morning, a private corridor incident had become impossible to contain. The detail that captured public attention was brutally simple. William had seen a member of Camilla's household inside Catherine's suite and walked out. That image required no complicated explanation. It carried anger, marriage, loyalty, and royal rivalry in a single gesture. Yet as newspapers and broadcasters raced toward the most explosive interpretation, the people actually involved were moving toward something far quieter: a settlement. William hated how quickly the story changed shape once it escaped the palace. Palace communications, the official system used to manage public statements and media responses, avoided discussing private household movements, and that silence created space for speculation. Commentators began arguing over how separate royal households should operate, and whether private family rooms should ever be accessible through shared staff authority. The prince understood why people were fascinated, but he also knew the public version was becoming simpler and harsher than the truth. Camilla felt the pressure from the other side. She had already learned that no direct instruction from her had sent the secretary into Catherine's rooms, yet headlines were treating the incident as if she had personally ordered the intrusion. The Queen Consort watched the coverage without speaking. When one fictional morning front page appeared on television with the enormous words, "William walks out," above two palace doors, she switched off the screen before the report finished. Outside Buckingham Palace, a broadcaster held up the same front page as a small crowd gathered behind the live camera position. William saw the coverage too, and frustration replaced some of his earlier anger. He had walked away because he was trying to control himself, not because he had declared war on Camilla. Now that gesture had become a symbol of royal division. The future king knew he could not correct every interpretation, but he also knew silence could no longer be total. Palace officials issued a tightly limited clarification, stating that new procedures governing access between private household areas were being introduced. The statement did not describe every detail, but it confirmed enough. A boundary had failed, and the system was being changed because of it. That mattered, because the palace was finally acknowledging a problem without turning private conflict into public accusation. William and Camilla met again shortly afterward. She accepted Catherine's proposed access restrictions, and he acknowledged that blaming her personally without evidence would have been unjust. Their agreement cooled the crisis, but it did not complete it. One final private conversation remained. The public saw a royal rupture. Behind the palace doors, Catherine was about to decide whether it would become one. The most important moment did not happen when William walked out. It happened afterward, when anger had cooled enough for everyone to decide what the walkout would mean. It could have become another permanent royal division. William against Camilla, household against household, suspicion replacing trust. Instead, Catherine forced the crisis toward something harder than revenge: accountability. By the final meeting, nobody could undo what happened. But they could decide what would never happen again. Catherine met Camilla privately and made her position clear. Her rooms would now operate under explicit access rules, meaning anyone outside her immediate household would need direct permission before entering for non-routine business. The change mattered because the entire crisis had begun with assumed authority. Broader palace procedures were tightened as well, preventing staff from using informal understandings as a substitute for real approval. Catherine was not demanding isolation. She was demanding respect. Camilla did not fight that decision. She told Catherine during a documented private conversation that she had never authorized the secretary to enter and regretted that someone attached to her household had made the princess feel intruded upon. The queen consort accepted responsibility for the failure within her team, without claiming personal intent behind it. Catherine accepted that distinction, but she also made something equally clear. Rank could never replace consent inside another family member's private space. The consequences followed quietly but firmly. Camilla's secretary was removed from duties involving unsupervised coordination with Catherine's household. It was not theatrical punishment. It was a direct response to poor judgment, unauthorized access, and the careless handling of sensitive information. The Queen accepted the decision because restoring trust required more than apologies. It required a visible change in responsibility. William reached his own conclusion through a private recorded conversation with Catherine. He admitted that walking out had stopped him from saying something in anger that could have caused lasting damage. What had looked like rejection from the outside had actually given him time to control himself, hear the facts, and separate suspicion from proof. Catherine understood that now. So did he. William later returned to the same suite where everything had begun. Catherine was waiting for him. He paused at the threshold, stepped inside, and closed the door softly behind him. This time there was no anger in the gesture. There was certainty. William's walkout was not the moment the monarchy fractured. It was the moment one royal family finally admitted that even inside a palace, loyalty cannot survive without boundaries, and privacy cannot exist without respect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.